Now then, this is going to be a video on astronauts keep finding God in space, so let's get straight into this.
Last week, a man named Reed Wiseman came back from the furthest any human being has ever traveled from Earth. He's the commander of NASA's Artemis II mission, the first crewed flight to the moon in over 50 years. He's a Navy test pilot, he's a scientist, and by his own admission, he's not a religious person. Here's what he told reporters at his post-mission press conference.
I wasn't religious at all. I was broadly atheist. Like, I was maybe open to the idea that there was a God, because Big Bang also seems like a silly explanation. That there was nothing, and then everything just started all like preformed with these rules out of thin air. But still, I saw no existence of God or anything. I lived my life largely thinking that there wasn't a God, and that it was just all random happenstance, even if the Big Bang didn't make a load of sense. And then, as time has progressed now, having spent most of my life that way, being atheist and not thinking that there's a God, I came not only to God, but then to Jesus as well, and understood that He is the path from my testimony. And I'm not going to get into that now. It took me 45 minutes to record my testimony. Yeah, we'll continue with this for now.
The only thing I can do is just share one quick story when I got back on the ship. I'm not really a religious person, but there was just no other avenue for me to explain anything or to experience anything. So I asked for the chaplain on the Navy ship to just come visit us for a minute. And when that man walked in, I'd never met him before in my life, but I saw the cross on his collar, and I broke down in tears. Like, it's very hard to fully grasp what we just went through. And
interesting. Because if it is if it's very stressful, and as it says in the Bible, I'm with the brokenhearted. If there is something that happens while they're up there where they feel brokenhearted, or there's some emotional vector, it could very well be an avenue for God to make contact with them, because that seems to be a way that God starts introducing us to His presence again. In my opinion.
You just said it's been a week since we've been back, but it's been a week of medical testing, physical testing, doctors, science objectives. We have not had that decompression. We have not had that reflection time. So I'm basing this on what we saw.
A man who did not believe in God, fresh off of the moon, asked for a chaplain, and when he saw the cross, he wept. Now, if this were just some one-off incident, this would be a very interesting.
If you want to watch this without me talking, the link is in the description, just to let you know.
Interesting story, but it's not a one-off. Okay, it's something that's been happening to astronauts for almost 60 years. And when you lay out the cases side by side, you discover a pattern that is very, very strange, stranger than anything you'd ever expect. Let's stay with Artemis II for a minute.
I'm not particularly scared of heights or anything, but I find that this makes me feel a bit uneasy. You know, when they're looking down on the Earth, and I know that it wouldn't just go and just fall straight to Earth, but you know, my monkey brain still makes me think that, oh, hi, could fall, sort of thing.
Because Wiseman was not the only one. A few days earlier, while the crew was still deep in space, farther from Earth than any human being had ever been, the pilot Victor Glover sent a message home. This was Easter Sunday.
And I'm trying to tell you, just trust me, you are special. In all of this emptiness, this is a whole bunch of nothing, this thing we call the universe.
Exactly. Our souls are the only thing that does matter. Not even this physical body matters that much. God still wants us to take care of it while we're in it and we're here, but it's our spirit which is the most important, which is why the pentagram, I always get these mixed up, but the pentagram, I believe, is, you know, the proper way up, where the star is pointing up, so the spirit is at the top and the flesh is underneath. And obviously that's why it's upside down in Satanism, because they put the spirit last, and that is to our eternal detriment to do so.
You have this oasis, this beautiful place that we get to exist together.
Watch the words that
Amen.
Glover reaches for, the most extreme place a human has ever been, and he calls it emptiness. He calls Earth an oasis. Glover is already a Christian, though, so someone could say he's sort of primed for that framing. But
fair enough, but still.
But then listen to Wiseman, who wasn't, describing the solar eclipse the crew witnessed from lunar orbit.
And when the sun eclipsed behind the moon, I think all four of us, I turned to Victor and I said, I don't think humanity has evolved to the point of being able to comprehend what we are looking at right now, because it was otherworldly and it was amazing.
Humanity has
It probably is a good point. We're probably not. We aren't adapted, because I still think like adaptation and evolution play a part in science and our existence, and they are algorithms created by God. So I imagine, we're evolutionary not predisposed to look at the Earth from that perspective. I imagine it does mess with your mind a little
Hasn't
bit.
evolved to comprehend it. From the scientifically trained commander who doesn't believe in God. Two men, two opposite worldviews, same.
I don't know. I think even as my old atheist self, purely believing in evolution, I would still think that that's still a credible point, that we aren't adapted to look at the world from that point of view. You know what I mean? It's like we're not meant to live underground either. I kind of think that has a negative effect on humans as well when we live underground.
Spacecraft, and both of them came home reaching for language that has no place in a purely materialist framework. Oasis, emptiness, otherworldly, broke down in tears. Christmas Eve 1968, 3 astronauts, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders, are the first human beings ever to orbit another world. On their 9th orbit, they begin what will become the most watched television broadcast in history. Up until that point, roughly 1 billion people, 1 in 4 humans alive on Earth at the time, tune in. Here's what most people...
That is a bit nuts. Can you imagine now if you managed to get a quarter of all people to tune into the same event? No chance. No chance. Everybody's attention is all like... Not everybody even watches the same biggest TV shows. It could be the biggest TV show and there's still be pockets of people that haven't seen it. But imagine back then, if a quarter of the world's population's seen it. Here in developed countries, that's like everybody.
People don't know about this. Frank Borman had been agonizing for weeks about what to say. He tried drafting something about peace, about America, but nothing fit. NASA brought in a professional speechwriter. He tried too, but nothing worked. It was actually the speechwriter's wife, a former member of the French Resistance, who finally made the suggestion. Why don't you begin at the beginning?
We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light.
I mean, I've heard it before, but now I think even now as a Christian, like fully on the team, I think it is nothing more apt. That's perfectly put. Yeah, I could give some examples of. I've used a few Bible verses at the minute, and it seemed very apt. But yeah,
And God saw the
I
light,
like it.
that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness.
All 3 astronauts took turns reading the first 10 verses of Genesis from the King James Bible, printed on fireproof paper, clipped onto the mission flight plan. Now, if that were the whole story, this would be a very different video. Okay, because here's what happens next, and this is the...
Interested as well, isn't it? That's the only religion, to my knowledge anyway, that's been read out in space. None of the others have managed it. Why is that? That's curious.
part I really want you to sit with and think about. The man whose voice read "In the beginning God created" to 1 billion people was an astronaut named Bill Anders. He was raised Catholic, and here's what Anders said, talking about his faith 50 years later in 2018. Quote, "It really undercut my religious beliefs. The idea that things rotate around the Pope, and up there is this big supercomputer wondering whether Billy was a good boy yesterday, it doesn't make any sense. It
Not 100% sure what he's trying to say there, but we'll continue.
really undercut my religious beliefs. Anders, a cradle Catholic, read Genesis from the moon and came back less religious than when he left. So notice what's happening here. Wiseman is moving toward God. Anders moved away from God. Glover is deepening in the gospel. Borman stays where he was. Same mission profile, same view from space, completely opposite religious trajectories. But that's not even the...
I would say then there's not a pattern. I don't know. It seems it's a profound experience, maybe similar to being in war, and it might change your perspective one way or the other. You might go to war and witness a miracle and think that it was God, and you might go to war, witness atrocities and never feel the touch of God and lose faith with him.
Strangest case. That's coming next. Apollo 14, February 1971, the sixth man to walk on the moon is a man named Edgar Mitchell. Mitchell was raised Southern Baptist. He was a Navy test pilot with a doctorate in aeronautical engineering from MIT by every measure. This is a hard-nosed empirical military guy, not someone you'd expect to come back from the moon with some sort of mystical experience. And yet, on the way home during a rest period as the spacecraft was slowly rotating to balance the sun's heat, Mitchell looked out the window at Earth and the cosmos, and in his own words said this: "It wasn't just intellectual knowledge, it was a subjective, visceral experience accompanied by ecstasy, a transformational experience." Mitchell comes back.
It wasn't just an intellectual knowledge. It was a subjective, visceral experience accompanied by ecstasy, a transformational experience. I mean, that is how I describe my experience coming to Jesus just this past Christmas. That is exactly, well, not exactly, but that is a way to describe it. For sure, not completely, but that's pretty much a mirror.
Back to Earth, and as any good scientist would, he tries to understand what just happened to him. So he goes to the Christian literature of his upbringing, nothing matches. He goes to the scientific literature, nothing matches. Eventually, he finds a description that fits in the Sanskrit texts of ancient India, a state called Savikalpa Samadhi, hope I'm saying that correctly, in which objects are perceived as elements in a vast, borderless oneness. Mitchell resigns from NASA in 1972 and founds the Institute of Noetic Sciences, dedicated to studying consciousness and the deeper unity of the cosmos. He spends the rest of his life as a seeker in the Eastern mystical tradition. But here's the detail that sort of brings the whole thing back to Wiseman.
I'd say that's a bit of a shame. He went the wrong direction. He went towards one of these religions that is not so correct. I'm sorry. For me, there's only one true way you've got to go, and that's towards Christ. He's how we connect with God. I felt God's presence for 4 years prior to coming to Christ, and once you tune in through Christ, it's a different experience completely. It is the way.
From last week, at that press conference, Wiseman was specifically asked whether he had some sort of Mitchell-style experience, a universal connectedness experience, a shift in consciousness.
My question's a little bit deep, so bear with me. When Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell was returning from the moon, he had an experience so profound that when he returned to Earth, he devoted the rest of his life to studying the nature of human consciousness. And it's a theme that all four of you touched on to varying degrees at some point during the mission. And so my question is, now that you've been back on Earth for just a few days and had a little bit of time to sit with it, do any of you feel as though you had an experience similar to what Mitchell described, this sense of universal connectedness? And did you experience somehow a shift in consciousness somehow? Thanks.
Yes.
That's
the question that made...
I mean, it's good that you said yes, but at the same time, just yes. I don't know. I thought we were going to get a bit more to go with here. But we'll
Wiseman reach for the cross. So now let's look at what we have on the table here. A military commander with no religious framework reaches for a cross. A hard-nosed test pilot with a doctorate from MIT has a mystical experience and turns to Eastern religion. A cradle Catholic reads Genesis from the moon and walks away from the faith that he was born into. Christian astronauts come home confirmed in their Christianity. Non-Christians come home describing the universe as emptiness and otherworldly. Whatever is going on up in there, like in space, whatever it is that hits these people when they see creation from the outside, it demands some kind of ultimate framework to understand what's going on. And the question I want to ask in the rest of this video is very simple. Why?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was the same with my experiences, which were more, it seems, to do with the demonic beings trying to make contact and, I don't know, causing aggressive behaviors and poltergeist activity, etc. Eventually, my own suspicion just kept leading me towards what would eventually become the truth, which is Christ. I know that sounds contrived again, but that is really the utter truth.
There's actually a really old answer to this question. The Catholic tradition has been giving it for 700 years. St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century said that human beings are made with a natural capacity to know God through creation. He's picking up directly from St. Paul in Romans chapter 1. The invisible things of God from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. Fast forward 700 years, we've got Alvin Plantinga, arguably one of the most important philosophers of religion of the last century, takes this Thomistic idea and gives it a precise name. He calls it the sensus divinitatis, the sense of the divine, a cognitive faculty, if you will.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, no matter where we all go in life, at some point, it all seems like we all do end up having to acknowledge the divine, whether you want to call him God, creator, whether there is somebody who created all this. You know what I mean? And I've known that for quite a while now. And I wouldn't say it's not a belief, it's knowledge. I know that there is a God, and nobody will ever convince me otherwise.
Like sight or hearing, but this sense is specifically for God. It's built into us, firing in response to appropriate triggers. And you want to know the example that Plantinga uses to describe what actually triggers this faculty? Well, he quotes Immanuel Kant, the starry heavens above and the moral law within. The starry heavens. Look at what several of these astronauts did when they saw the starry heavens in a way that Kant could have only dreamed of. Wiseman had no religious framework at all, and when he came back, the first thing he reached for was a cross. Glover, who already had the gospel, came back describing Earth as an oasis in the emptiness. Mitchell, a hard-nosed Navy engineer, had what he himself called a visceral, ecstatic experience of unity with the cosmos. Something is happening across those three cases that looks exactly like Plantinga is describing. A faculty built into every human being, recognizing wordlessly and immediately that they are small creatures in the presence of something unimaginably greater than themselves. The sensus divinitatis is firing in three very different men in response to the same overwhelming trigger. But then there's Anders. Because Anders is the...
Was this going to segue to here? I'm sure we've already covered him, and he became less religious. So
the obvious objection to everything I just said. Okay, here's a guy who saw the cosmos just as vividly as Wiseman, as Glover, and as Mitchell did, and he came back less religious, not more. So, if the sensus divinitatis is a faculty that fires when you see the starry heavens, how do we explain Anders? So let's be honest about what actually happened with him. Okay, Anders almost certainly had the sensus divinitatis operating in his life long before the Apollo 8 mission. That's how he ended up being a Catholic in the first place. Most believers aren't believers because they've read Aquinas, his 5 Ways, or Richard Swinburne. They're believers because something in them from an early age sensed that God is real when they looked at the world. That's the faculty doing its job. What happened in space wasn't that the sensus divinitatis, the faculty, fired harder. What happened is that Anders encountered what he took to be a defeater for the beliefs that the faculty had given him. Listen to him again. He says, the idea that things rotate around the Pope, and up there is a big supercomputer wondering whether Billy was a good boy yesterday.
I've got to say, man, it does seem like Catholics have a lot of like pent-up annoyance with their religion compared to the other ones. It's always Catholics, man. I know that's going to piss people off, but that's what I've noticed. Like, if they're ever an aggressive Christian, they're a Catholic. And if they're ever like somebody who's like hardline atheist, you're not going to be able to convince them otherwise. They end up admitting they came from a Catholic background. It's always Catholicism every time.
It doesn't make any sense. That's not a man describing a spiritual experience. That's a man describing an argument. The experience of the cosmic scale, how vast it is, how indifferent it looks, how small Earth appears in it, struck him as evidence against the specific claims of the Catholic Church that he grew up in. But here's where Plantinga is actually very clear. Beliefs produced by this faculty are more like perceptual beliefs than like mathematical proofs. You can see something with your own eyes and still later be talked out of trusting what you saw by what seems like stronger countervailing evidence. You can think you see a sheep in the field, but then when you get closer, it might look like something else entirely. Same with belief in God. Okay, the faculty gives you a default, properly basic belief, but that belief is defeasible. A defeater or an argument against it can override it. So Anders...
I don't know. Not for me. My Divinitas, whatever it was called, I forget the name now. It would never be able to be taken from me now from my testimony coming to God, with how long it took and all the sort of factors along the way. Yeah. But I'm going to leave this video here. If you want to catch the rest of his video, because I'm only halfway through it at the minute, then feel free to check it out with the link in the description. And I'll see you in the next one of my videos as well.